there is a feeling that most people would struggle to put into words. A quiet, persistent sense that you don't quite belong to the time you were born into. That the pace of the world around you is somehow wrong. That the things everyone else seems obsessed with feel hollow, surface level, almost meaningless, while the things that move you deeply seem to belong to another century entirely. Maybe you find yourself drawn to old music in a way that feels less like preference and more like memory. Maybe you read literature from 100 years ago and feel more understood by it than by anything written today. Maybe you look at the speed of modern life, the noise, the performance, the constant motion, and feel not just disconnected from it, but almost allergic to it. And if you have ever voiced this feeling, you probably received one of two responses. Either gentle amusement, the kind people offer when they think something is a quirky personality trait and nothing more, or something more dismissive, the suggestion that you are simply being romantic about the past, that you are idealizing what you don't fully understand. But here is what neither of those responses account for. Psychology, philosophy, and the study of human consciousness all point towards something far more significant happening inside people who feel this way. This is not nostalgia in the ordinary sense. This is not mere preference for vintage aesthetics or slower living. What you are experiencing is a specific and rare orientation of consciousness, one that has produced some of the most important thinkers, artists, and minds in human history. And today, son, we are going to understand exactly what it means. Let's begin with a concept that most people have never heard of, but that immediately makes sense the moment you encounter it. The German philosopher Hermann Hesse described certain individuals as zeitgeist-resistant, people whose inner world operates on a frequency that exists outside the dominant cultural current of their time. Not behind it. Not ahead of it. Simply outside of it. These are people whose values, sensibilities, and ways of experiencing the world do not naturally synchronize with the era they inhabit. And rather than this being a deficiency, Hesse argued, and modern psychology increasingly confirms, that this misalignment is actually a marker of a particular kind of depth that most people never develop. Think of it this way. Every era has a dominant frequency, a set of values, speeds, aesthetics, and priorities that define what is considered normal, desirable, and worth pursuing. Most people naturally attune to this frequency. They absorb it from their environment, from their peers, from the media they consume, without ever questioning whether it actually resonates with who they fundamentally are. But some people, a small number, carry an internal frequency that doesn't match. And no matter how much the world turns up the volume on its own signal, these people cannot fully tune in. They can participate in the present. They can function within it. But they never feel fully of it. This is not dysfunction. This is independence of consciousness at the deepest possible level. Now let's go deeper into the specific psychological traits that live inside people who feel born into the wrong era, because each one of them reveals something remarkable. The first trait is what psychologists call temporal dissonance. Temporal dissonance is the experience of feeling out of sync with the time you inhabit, not just culturally, but almost physically. Like the rhythm of the present world runs at a speed your nervous system was never designed for. People who experience this often describe modern life as exhausting in a way that goes beyond busyness. It is not that they are doing too much. It is that the fundamental pace and texture of contemporary existence, the immediacy, the brevity, the constant stimulation, feels like a language they were never born speaking. They gravitate instinctively toward slowness, toward depth over breadth, toward things that were built to last rather than things built to trend. And there is a neurological reason for this. Research into sensory processing sensitivity, a trait identified by psychologist Elaine Aron, shows that highly sensitive individuals process environmental stimulation more deeply than others. Their nervous systems extract more information from every experience, which means they require more time, more quiet, and more depth to feel genuinely nourished. In an era defined by acceleration, this is not a malfunction. It is a fundamentally different relationship with time itself. The second trait is a value system that seems to come from somewhere else, that people who feel born in the wrong era almost universally describe a set of values that they did not consciously choose, that simply exist inside them, fully formed, and seem to predate any external influence. Things like depth of relationship over quantity of connection, craftsmanship over convenience, meaning over efficiency, silence over noise, loyalty over novelty. These are not values that the contemporary world actively cultivates. In fact, in many ways, the modern economy is specifically designed to erode them, to replace depth with speed, loyalty with options, and meaning with distraction. And yet, these values persist in certain people regardless. They cannot be socialized out of them. They cannot be marketed away. The person who values a handwritten letter in an age of instant messaging is not being impractical. They are being faithful to something inside themselves that has always known the difference between communication and connection. This kind of value stability, maintaining a core inner world that resists external cultural pressure, is, in psychological terms, one of the strongest markers of what researchers call autonomous identity formation. It is the development of a self that is genuinely self-determined rather than socially constructed. And it is extraordinarily rare. The third trait is a relationship with beauty that operates on a different register entirely. There is a particular kind of person who is moved by things that most people walk past without a second thought. The quality of afternoon light through old glass, the structure of a sentence written a century ago, the silence between notes in a piece of music composed before anyone alive today was born. This is not pretension. This is not performance. This is a form of aesthetic perception that psychologists and philosophers have long recognized as distinct, what Immanuel Kant called the sublime, the capacity to be genuinely arrested by beauty in a way that temporarily dissolves the boundary between self and world. People who feel temporally displaced often experience beauty this way, not as pleasure, but as recognition, as if the beautiful thing is not new to them, but remembered, as if it is confirmation of something they have always known, but rarely found, expressed in the world around them. This kind of aesthetic depth is not common. It requires a perceptual sensitivity and an inner richness that most people never cultivate. And it is almost always accompanied by a creative capacity, an ability to produce, appreciate, or curate things of genuine and lasting beauty that is among the most valuable contributions any person can make to human culture. The fourth trait is a profound discomfort with superficiality. People who feel born in the wrong era do not simply prefer depth. They experience superficiality as something close to physical discomfort. Small talk is not merely boring, it is draining in a way that is almost medicinal in its effect, like exposure to something the body is mildly allergic to. This is often misread as arrogance, as social difficulty, as an inability to connect with people. But the truth is precisely the opposite. And these individuals are capable of extraordinary depth of connection, the kind of connection that most people spend their entire lives searching for and rarely find. What they cannot do is pretend that surface-level interaction satisfies them. They cannot perform enthusiasm for conversations that carry no real weight. And in a world that often mistakes performance for personality, this honesty reads as coldness. But here is what it actually is. It is a refusal to devalue human connection by treating it as something casual. Every person who has ever described being truly known by one of these individuals will tell you that the experience is unlike anything they have encountered elsewhere. Because when someone who is allergic to superficiality finally connects with another person, they connect completely, fully, with a quality of attention and presence that feels, in the truest sense of the word, rare. The fifth trait is a quiet inner life of almost architectural complexity. People who feel temporarily out of place almost always have an interior world of extraordinary richness. Thoughts that layer upon thoughts, memories that carry emotional texture years and decades after the event. An imagination that is not merely creative, but structurally complex, capable of holding multiple perspectives, timelines, and emotional registers simultaneously. This is the inner life of a person whose mind was built for depth in an age that increasingly rewards surface. And it creates a particular kind of loneliness, not the loneliness of someone who has no one, but the loneliness of someone whose inner world is so vast and so intricate that bringing another person fully into it feels almost impossible. This is what the poet Rainer Maria Rilke was describing when he wrote about the fundamental solitude of deeply inner people. Not isolation chosen out of fear, but solitude that arrives naturally from having a self that is too full, too complex, and too alive to be easily shared. Now comes the reframe that everything before it has been building toward. The feeling of being born in the wrong era is real. The displacement is real. The exhaustion of navigating a world that seems built on a frequency you were never designed to receive, that is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged as real, not romanticized away. But here is what else is real. Every era has needed people who were not entirely of it. Every period of human culture has required individuals who carried values, sensibilities, and ways of seeing that existed outside the dominant current, who preserved something essential that the age was in danger of losing, or who carried something necessary that the age had not yet learned to want. The troubadours of medieval Europe, the romantic poets who raged against the Industrial Revolution, the jazz musicians who maintained spiritual depth in an era of mechanical production, the philosophers who kept asking why in ages that only wanted to know how. None of them fully belonged to their time. All of them shaped it in ways that outlasted it. You are not a person who arrived too late or too early, but you are a person who arrived exactly when a particular kind of consciousness was needed, even if the world has not yet learned to recognize that need. There is a Japanese concept called mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the passing of things. It is considered one of the highest forms of human sensitivity, the ability to feel the beauty and the sadness of impermanence simultaneously, to be moved by what most people have already moved past. This is the gift inside the displacement, the ability to carry what the world is forgetting, to feel the weight of what is being lost, to remain faithful to a depth of experience that acceleration is slowly erasing from the culture at large. You are not out of place. You are out of time, in the way that all truly essential things eventually are. Timeless does not mean irrelevant. It means it outlasts the moment it was born into. The era you feel you belong to is not behind you. It is the one you are quietly building, inside yourself, in everything you create, in every connection you make with the rare others who feel exactly the same way. And that era, when it arrives, as it always does, will be made entirely of people like you. If you have carried this feeling your entire life and never had language for it, now you do. Stay close to this channel. There is more here for the kind of mind that has always felt it was searching for something the present world forgot to keep.